Alright, welcome. So I got a rare one for you guys here today. This one is the Serge Panchenko 7 Midtech. And it's called the 7 because it's 6.5 inches overall. Yeah, I don't get the name either, but either way, this is an interesting little knife here. And Serge Panchenko himself, he's an odd maker. If you've ever seen the Coin Claw, it's the same guy who makes that. He makes a lot of small, interesting little knife curiosities or small knives, and he just finishes all of them to make them look like steampunk artifacts. The 7 here is probably his most normal looking design. I haven't really handled much else from him, so this is actually the only one I have handled, so just keep that in mind. His stuff is pretty sought after, and it doesn't really seem like he makes many customs. A custom 7 would sell around, I think, $1,200, and then even a mid-tech like this one right here, I've seen some of the secondary market prices go crazy, like up to 600 or 700. I don't remember how much they were originally, but that's the high end of the secondary market prices. And let me just tell you guys a true story right here. So, I had a friend visit my house a few days ago. He knows that I like the high-end stuff, and he himself, though, he knows nothing about the knife market. So the guy picks up a large 21 and jokingly says, "What is this, like $600? And I tell him what it actually goes for, and he just accepts that. He puts it back down. Then he picks up the 7 right next to it, and he says, "And what's this one, like $50? And I told him what exactly it goes for, and I told him it was a fair bit more than that 21. And the look on his face, it was one of utter disbelief and confusion. And the thing is, can you blame him though? Just take a look at this one right here. You take it at face value, and you just really need to wonder, what makes this thing right here so special? The price sounds insane for what's here, because I'm looking at it and I don't really see that much here. It just looks like a small, flimsy, bare bones little frame lock flipper in CPM 154. I don't see any fancy finishing or high-end materials or, well, even much material at all. Even the pivot right here looks kind of cheap. So what makes this tiny mid-tech here cost more than some makers' full customs? Well, I'm going to walk you guys through it. I didn't get it either until I got this one in hand. And the first thing I do when I get a knife is, well, other than look at it, I flip it. And when I did, I couldn't believe it. This is a perfect action. Not just good or adequate or gets the job done. It's perfect. It's not a mindlessly hard detent, it's a hard detent but not overly hard. So when I say perfect, I do mean perfect. It has such a refined feeling to it that feels like it's been precisely dialed in. It gives you a nice feeling of quality that you just don't really get all that often. It feels like clockwork. And unless you're intentionally trying to, there's no way to misfire this knife. You pull back on that flipper, you will have an open knife 10 times out of 10. The only times you actually don't is when I really try to half kick it out. And the first time I flipped this one, I knew that I was dealing with something that was deceptively simple. And the thing is, this one right here, it's a mid-tech. I can't even begin to imagine what this man's customs must feel like if he puts this much into his mid-techs. There's a certain weight to that blade right there when it fires. By any standard, this is a very light blade. You can see it's not really all that thick. But for the size of knife right here, it's actually relatively thick for the size. So, and the other thing is that for how light the blade is, the frame is even lighter because you can see it's much thinner. So when that blade kicks out right there, the bearings let it keep all that momentum when it rockets out, and when it locks open, you actually feel it. Not the same way you feel something like on a larger blade or something, but this blade here, it has a bit of presence. And I know that sounds really pretentious right there. I'm trying hard to describe an action to you through a camera, but you can kind of see it through your screen, but you can't really feel it in person. So when that blade whips out, you hear the click of that lock engaging, and it just sounds like quality too. The lockup on this one, extremely solid. I'm getting no hints of up and down play at all, no side to side play when locked. There is a slight bit of side to side play when unlocked, and I've tried and I don't think I can get rid of it on this one. The pivot here is very small, and it's using the smallest ball bearing race that I've seen on a folder. So there really isn't that much to support the blade laterally. So it's not really a problem though, and it probably just goes without saying, but don't pry with this little guy and you'll probably be fine. The other thing is, you've probably seen it already, but when you unlock it, there's a good bit of lock stick to it. I've said before that I generally don't really mind lock stick, but it kind of depends on the situation. So in normal situations, lock stick just kind of lets me know that a frame lock like this one right here matches up well with the blade, and that the lock face on the blade has good geometry. And the other thing is, since it sticks, it makes the lockup stronger. On a small thin knife on this one right here, all that makes it a bit more reassuring when you use it. It doesn't seem like a knife that's going to close on you very easily. But I will say though, for the size of this knife, that's a lot of stick. It probably wouldn't be easy to do, and this is most likely just paranoia, but I do feel like I could probably mess that lockup by overbending it. It's just a gut feeling, and that's without the lock stick even factored in. With it, it just seems like it might be a problem. It takes a certain amount of force needed to break the lock stick, and when it finally gives, you're putting quite a bit into that lock bar. Like breaking the detent on a flipper or something like that. And that force needs to go somewhere. And there's no over travel stop on this one. I get why it isn't here. It wouldn't really go with a simple design like this one, but overall, it just worries me. So when I close this one, I either put my thumb over or I wrap my index finger around like this to make sure I don't overdo it. It might very well go away as it breaks in, but I'm a bit uneasy on the lock stick here as it is. It's still very easy to disengage one-handed though. It sometimes just takes a bit more force, but it does work. And when you do, you can see that the blade drops mostly free. So the detent hits very early on this one right here. About right over here. And if you put your thumb where the knife actually tells you to right here, the flipper will hit when it's well over. So you'll never really hang up on the detent on this one when you're closing, and that's very much appreciated because I don't know if you can really see on camera, but just look how pronounced that detent ball is right there. If I was to close it with it hung up on there, yeah, that's a lot of force right there. I'm glad I only need to do this on camera because it's about to fly out of my hand by the time it actually closes. Also, other thing, perfect centering on this one. And there's no other way to say this, but this thing is just flawlessly built for what it is. Now onto the finish. This right here, it's really just an acid wash finish. It's one of the easiest and fastest finishes to do. But here, you can tell it's a quality acid wash. This thing was heavily tumbled to kind of give it that aged look that Panchenko stuff is known for. It doesn't help me stomach the price, but at least it looks good for what it is. And I will say, thank God he drilled some holes and milled his logo on the frame right here. If it wasn't there, it would just make the knife seem a bit too lazy, and it looks great with it right there. Blade on this one right here is just in CPM 154, like I said before. Again, nothing too special about it, but look at the grind on this one. I don't know if I can really show it very well on camera, but that's a paper thin edge right there. That's a very aggressive hollow grind right there. So even though this thing is using relatively thick stock for the size, it's still paper thin behind the edge, so you get the best of both. It slices like crazy, and the stock thickness right there, it gives you a good place to rest your thumb on when you're actually cutting something. But I do need to say, I'm not a big fan of that sharpening choil right there. It's just a bit too big for what it needs to be. It adds a good bit of dead space on an already small design, and it's a place where what you're cutting can just kind of slide into and bunch up. But other than that, I do really like that blade right there. I've always said that a sheep's foot type blade is what I prefer on my smaller folders. It just gives me more cutting ability and lets me apply more pressure on that point. And I can use that point a bit more precisely too. Like, you can kind of tell too. Kind of the same thing on my busker and my small 21. But this is also where you can really see where the 7 kind of stumbles for me. Or more specifically, this angle right here. Just close these up. It is about time that choosing a not flat background actually helped me out. You can kind of see a stock thicknesses between all of them right there. You can kind of see that the 7 is a lot thinner than the rest of them. So I don't know, it just doesn't feel right in hand. The frame is too thin, it looks like a knife that had its scales taken off and you're just holding it by the liners. That's just kind of how it feels. It's not really uncomfortable or anything like that, there are no hot spots at all, but it just kind of feels like something's missing. And with that neutral handle right there, means that this one right here isn't really all that great in hand. You're not really going to be doing much hard cutting with this little thing right here, so you can kind of argue that it doesn't really matter. But I'll just say it's just, I guess, far outside of what I prefer. To its credit though, it is lightweight, but it's not flimsy. There's a difference here. I've had a Brad Sinker before where I couldn't help but think to myself, I can break this thing. I don't get that feeling here. The 7 stops a few steps before that. Like, even right here, where standoff's right here, pivot's right here, if I pinch this part right here, I can hardly see any movement at all. So this still kind of makes me feel like it's a solid tool. Like, it doesn't feel like something that's going to break. And I really do appreciate that. Clip on this one right here, it's just a bend spring clip. I normally prefer a milled clip whenever possible, but I kind of do like the bent spring clip here. Like a milled clip would just kind of feel completely out of place. The spring clip here just kind of goes with the simplicity, and that's about it. You can kind of tell that there isn't really that much to talk about here. This is probably my shortest full review. And it's another one of those knives where I'll say it really isn't for me, but I have no doubt that it could be the perfect folder for someone else. As for the price right here, I can only talk about the secondary market here. You're not getting this direct from Serge anytime soon. I don't think it's worth $700. There's no way I see that here, but if that's what the market has landed on, then that's what it is. It is what it is. Even with the exceptional build quality here, I personally don't think there's enough here to justify that inflated price, but it could be different for you. But I will say handling this one right here makes me really want to handle a full custom version. Because even though there really isn't that much here, what is here is done about as well as it could have been done. Mechanically, this knife is perfect. And it has one of the best, most well-tuned actions that I've handled. And if small and thin is your thing, and I mean like absolute #1 priority in the knife world, then I don't think you can do much better than this one right here. That's all I got for you here. Take care.